My parents texted me at midnight to say they knew I paid $520,000 to save the house. But Leela didn't want me at Thanksgiving. There was no call or explanation, just a cold message glowing in my dim loft. I stared at it, typed noted, and closed the last chapter of being my family's punching bag. Their perfect little Thanksgiving fell apart on its own. I didn't lift a finger. And that disaster was only the beginning. Before the full story, I asked people to like, comment, and share where they were listening from. I wondered if anyone else had been taken for granted by the people they destroyed their life to protect. Hearing other people's stories reminded me I wasn't alone. Being the responsible one was never a choice, it was a silent assignment. I'm Aria Nolan, 34, working in tech in Portland. My life is calm and structured, the opposite of my family. I grew up in a house where logic didn't matter as much as keeping the peace. And keeping the peace always meant protecting Leela from the chaos she caused. That became my default role for years. Leila was adored from the moment she could talk, magnetic, bright, and endlessly excused. She expected everything, asked for nothing, and always got her way. When she messed up, my parents softened every blow. If she overspent, they paid it. If she hurt someone, she was just expressive, and I became the reliable one who silently handled the fallout. I fixed broken appliances, broken finances, and broken promises. My name was used as the emergency contact for everything. Not because I volunteered, but because letting things implode wasn't an option. 6 months ago, everything nearly collapsed. My parents called me sobbing, finally confessing what they'd been hiding. They were months behind on the mortgage for the lake house they'd owned for decades. Layla had drained their retirement savings again with impulsive spending and failed business ideas. My parents had made poor decisions trying to secretly patch the damage. They were just weeks away from losing the home. I didn't hesitate. I liquidated investments I'd built over 15 years, sold a rental property, and moved funds meant for my future. When everything settled, I had wired them $520,000 with no questions asked. My attorney insisted we put it in writing. My parents signed every document without hesitation because they were desperate. For a brief moment, life felt stable again. Layla returned to her usual cycle: designer outfits, flashy posts, and new careers every 2 weeks. My parents insisted she was just exploring herself. It was the same excuse they'd always used. I tried to step back. I reminded myself that fixing things was no longer my responsibility. But the distance didn't stop the small slights from continuing. I noticed conversations I wasn't included in and photos I was cropped out of. They took vacations without pretending to invite me. And every time, a thought whispered that I paid for the roof they lived under, yet was always outside. I pushed that feeling down. I told myself it wasn't worth fighting. But everything shattered the night they sent that text. They told me I wasn't welcome at Thanksgiving because Leela didn't want me there. The message was so casual it felt unreal. I reread it a dozen times, not out of confusion but disbelief. They spoke like it was a simple reminder, like asking me to bring napkins. No apology. No conversation, just a decision made about me without me. For a moment, I froze. I waited for guilt to climb into my chest, for the old instincts to defend them. I expected myself to shrink, to rationalize, to excuse them like I always had. But instead, a quietness settled, the kind that comes before a storm. It felt final. It felt true. Then my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Leela. Her message was shorter, sharper, and almost amused. "It's not personal," the text read. "I just want a smooth evening. You can be intense. Let's grab lunch next week." I stared at that single word until it blurred across the screen. I hadn't been intense when I sold my rental condo to save my parents' home. I hadn't been intense when I covered her reckless credit card spending without exposing her. But now, I was intense only because she didn't want to face the one person she could never control. A strange warmth crawled up my spine, clarity replacing every old instinct. I typed one word back, noted. It wasn't sarcastic or defensive, it was final. For the first time in years, that word wasn't surrender. It was a lock snapping shut. It was a boundary drawn, a choice finally made in my favor. I set my phone down and walked across my loft, the hardwood cold beneath my feet. In the corner sat a small safe I rarely touched. Inside it lay a thin folder, light in weight, heavy in consequence. Months ago, when I saved my parents' home, my attorney Marcus insisted on a formal agreement. My parents signed through tears, barely reading, whispering, "You saved us." They never imagined I would one day use it. That folder held everything: signatures, clauses, and timelines. It included the clause giving them 6 months to buy the house back at market value or begin paying rent. Thanksgiving would mark the final week. I ran my fingers along the folder's edge, feeling the years of imbalance pressed into it. They had relied on my silence, my stability, my endless forgiveness. But they had mistaken quiet compliance for consent. The folder felt heavier than its paper should allow, weighted with every unspoken sacrifice. I carried it to my desk and laid it under the soft evening light. For the first time, it looked less like responsibility and more like truth. For years, I had believed patience and generosity would eventually be seen, that they'd understand the difference between convenience and love. But staring at the agreement, I realized they had chosen not to see anything at all. I opened my laptop and clicked on a folder labeled Records. Inside were months of screenshots, bank statements, and transactions, proof of Lila's reckless spending I had quietly covered. I hadn't collected them for revenge, only because I was tired of being the sole witness to the truth. As I scrolled, the silence in the loft thickened with anticipation. My phone buzzed again, Lila, but I ignored it. Instead, I called Marcus. He answered on the second ring, his voice tired and rough. Iris? Everything okay? He murmured. No, I said calmly, but it will be. He paused, sharper now. The house? He asked. Yes, I replied. Send the notice before Thanksgiving. There was a longer pause, heavy and knowing. Are you sure you're done being taken for granted? He asked softly. I looked at the city lights reflecting through the glass and said, steady and anchored, I'm done. All right, he said. I'll prepare everything in the morning. When the call ended, I exhaled a breath I didn't know I had been holding. My loft felt lighter, almost airy, though nothing in the room had changed. The shift was inside me, the moment a boundary ignored for years finally solidified. I stood by the window, watching the city glitter below like scattered jewels on wet asphalt. Seattle stretched outward, its lights flickering like quiet promises into the night. Cars slipped along rain-coated streets, unaware that in one quiet corner, everything had just pivoted. My family's world had shifted, and they didn't even know it yet. My phone buzzed again, this time with a message from my mother. Sweetheart, don't be upset, it's just easier for your sister. We'll make it up to you later. Later had been the anthem of my childhood, a word that always meant never. I didn't reply. Thanksgiving approached, and Maya curated her flawless spectacle with obsessive precision. She styled herself as the perfect hostess, dazzling her circle and pretending the world revolved around her. My parents orbited her as always, blind to the fractures beneath the shine. But today, the consequences were coming. They were silent, elegant, and unavoidable, wrapped not in anger but in legally binding reality they had signed themselves. And they were timed to land exactly when she least expected them. Morning broke under a blanket of dense Seattle fog, the kind that made the lake look alive. Inside the Bennett house, nothing resembled calm as Maya raced through her flawless performance checklist. Guests she hoped to impress trickled in, including her supervisor, and she floated among them in a cream dress, soaking in praise like oxygen. My mother hovered behind her, murmuring excuses with a careful softness. Our older daughter isn't here today, she needed space, she whispered, smoothing the absence into something gentle. It was the same delicate lie she had told for decades whenever Maya faltered. Then the doorbell rang, one ordinary chime that sliced their holiday illusion clean in half. Mom, get that, Maya said while adjusting her dress. Probably the dessert delivery. It wasn't dessert. At the door stood a man in a plain jacket holding a thin package and a sealed envelope. His voice was calm, steady, professional as he said, I have documents for Robert and Elaine Bennett. My mother blinked, baffled. Oh, maybe something we forgot to order. He handed her the envelope, took the signature, and left without ceremony, without emotion, without delay. My father stepped forward, his brow tightening the instant he saw the legal header. He recognized the weight of it before even opening it. And in that quiet living room, denial finally met reality. The room froze as soon as they heard the envelope was from my attorney. Nova tried to smile it away, but the truth surfaced the moment the documents were opened. Every payment, every bill, and every transfer I made for them was clearly listed inside. Mom's hands shook as she whispered about rent, while Dad went pale reading the terms. Nova snatched the papers, furious and confused, insisting it was still their home. But Dad admitted quietly that they had signed everything away 6 months ago, and the house belonged to me now. Maya's face drained when she saw her own signature confirming she had witnessed the agreement. Her supervisor watched as the evidence exposed her lies about supporting her parents. The financial trail revealed that her expensive lifestyle had been funded by my money, not hers. Mom begged Dad to call me, and by the time I answered, there were over 30 missed calls. They insisted this shouldn't have happened on Thanksgiving. I gently reminded them that I was only respecting their wish for me not to come. Nova grabbed the phone and screamed that I was ruining her holiday and her reputation. Her reaction showed she had no remorse, only embarrassment. I told her I wasn't punishing anyone, I was simply enforcing the agreement. Silence settled as they realized I was no longer the person they could take for granted. Dad asked what they were supposed to do now. I told them their choices were simple: buy the house back or pay rent. Nova whispered that they couldn't afford either option. I reminded her they could have, if she hadn't drained their accounts and maxed their credit lines. Even her supervisor understood the truth once he saw the documents. Mom accused me of trying to humiliate her. I told her softly that humiliation was not my intention. I was only allowing them to face the consequences of their own decisions. I stopped shielding them from reality and let the truth settle between us before speaking. Their perfect Thanksgiving fell apart not because I acted, but because I finally stepped away from carrying their consequences. With calm certainty, I told them I was done being taken for granted and ended the call. Across the lake, the illusion of their flawless gathering collapsed quietly. No arguments, no theatrics, just the sudden absence of the support they'd always assumed I'd provide. Their world crumbled because I no longer held it up. In the days that followed, a new silence settled over them. One born not from manipulation but from confrontation with truth. Thanksgiving disintegrated into awkward exits and tense glances. Maya's supervisor left visibly disturbed, the documents replaying in his mind long after he walked out. My parents reached out again, this time with questions instead of excuses. They began unraveling the financial chaos Maya had created, tracing each reckless decision. Shock shifted into shame, and shame slowly hardened into accountability. They stopped asking me to fix anything, realizing finally the harm their avoidance had caused. For once, the burden of correction didn't fall on me. And for the first time in years, they faced the consequences directly. I wandered Seattle's streets that week, breathing air that felt clearer than it ever had. Anger was gone, relief hadn't yet arrived, but balance settled in its place. It felt like the world had finally stopped tilting away from me. A week later, my father asked to meet with quiet sincerity. He admitted they'd grown comfortable depending on me, blind to the weight they placed on my shoulders. My mother apologized plainly, not out of guilt or show, but from a place of honest recognition. None of us knew what the house's future held, and for once, the uncertainty wasn't mine to carry. They began rebuilding without leaning on me, learning the ground beneath their own feet. It was a shift I had waited years to see. Maya said nothing, stripped of her usual defenses and charm. Her silence held more truth than any apologies she could have offered. For the first time, she faced the consequences without hiding behind performance. And as I watched my family confront themselves honestly, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not victory, not vindication, just quiet peace. A peace earned through boundaries instead of sacrifice. I met my parents again 2 weeks later, this time in a small cafe overlooking the water. They didn't come with expectations or practiced speeches, just the quiet humility of people finally choosing truth over comfort. The air between us felt different, stripped of years of guilt and assumptions. My father spoke first, hands folded tightly as if anchoring himself. He acknowledged every blind spot, every excuse he once believed was harmless, and every moment he let silence replace responsibility. The honesty in his voice held a weight I'd never heard before. My mother listened quietly, her eyes red but steady, no longer hiding behind emotional pleas or soft manipulation. She admitted she had spent years protecting the wrong daughter, mistaking Maya's fragility for need and my strength for invincibility. This time, her apology wasn't a way to pull me back, and it was a release. They told me they planned to meet with a financial advisor, confronting the reality they had avoided for years. They discussed selling belongings they once considered untouchable, choosing stability over pride. Their willingness to act instead of leaning on me was the first real change I'd witnessed. I felt a strange tenderness settle in my chest, not forgiveness, not yet, but possibility. They weren't asking for shortcuts or second chances. They were choosing accountability on their own terms. For the first time, I wasn't the fixer, just a witness. Maya, however, remained silent the entire time. She sat with her hands clasped, not in defiance, but in a quiet recognition that her world had shifted in ways she couldn't charm herself out of. The absence of her usual excuses felt louder than any outburst. When our meeting ended, my father hesitated before speaking again. He said he hoped someday I might trust them with parts of my life again, but he understood that the timeline was mine to decide. There was no pressure, no expectation, just respect. As I walked home that evening, Seattle's lights shimmered across the water like scattered hope. The air was cool and crisp, wrapping around me in a calm I hadn't known in years. It felt like the world was subtly making space for who I was becoming. The next morning, I received an unexpected email from Maya. No apologies, no explanations, just a short message asking if we could talk when I was ready. Her words were uncertain, like someone learning a language she'd never bothered to speak. I didn't respond right away. Some wounds need space before they can be touched, even by the person who caused them. But the fact that she didn't demand or expect anything was its own shift. A week later, I visited my house for the first time since everything unfolded. The rooms were quieter, stripped of the forced excitement Maya used to create for her audience. It felt like the walls themselves were relieved to no longer carry the weight of pretense. Dad showed me the documents they'd printed, organized neatly into folders. They had already begun budgeting, cutting expenses, and setting plans in motion for the rent. Their pride, once fragile and defensive, had settled into something grounded. Mom looked tired but clearer, like someone slowly waking from a long illusion. She apologized again, not to pull me back, but to acknowledge the gap she had helped create between us. For the first time, the words didn't feel like a performance. I walked through the hallway, tracing the memories etched into familiar corners. This house had once felt like a burden chained to my name, a constant reminder of sacrifices made in silence. Now, it felt like a boundary reclaimed, a line drawn with intention rather than resentment. When we sat in the living room, Maya finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, stripped of everything she once used to shield herself. No charm, no excuses, no entitlement. She said she knew I didn't owe her forgiveness, but she wanted to try to earn it someday. I